The dusk settles, Scipio. What weighs on you? The cost, Hannibal. Victories leave us hollow. True, we conquer, yet peace eludes.
Years after the war, in a city called Ephesus, two graying men met and talked about greatness. One was Hannibal, the most feared military mind who ever lived, now an exile serving for a foreign king. The other was the man who had beaten him. Scipio asked him who was the greatest general of all time. Hannibal answered without hesitation, Alexander the First. Pyrrhus second, and third, himself. Scipio laughed. And where would you rank yourself, he asked, if you had defeated me at Zama? In that case, Hannibal said, I would place myself above them all. Follow the logic of that answer to its end. If defeating Scipio would have made Hannibal the greatest general who ever lived, greater than Alexander himself, then what does that make the man who actually did it? Hannibal never said the words. He did not need to. He had placed Scipio not on the list, but above it, beyond the reach of ranking, the greatest compliment one commander ever paid another, hidden inside its own silence. Scipio understood immediately. That is why he laughed. This is not a story of the man's life, it is the story of the ideas that ran it, because the Scipio Africanus, the general who never lost a battle, was not primarily a soldier. He was a mind operating under a philosophy that answered the four hardest questions a powerful human being will ever face. How do you defeat what cannot be defeated? What do you do with a beaten enemy? What do you do with power once it is yours? And what do you do when the world you saved turns against you? Most men never face even one of these questions. Scipio faced all four. His answers are the philosophy. It began not in triumph, in catastrophe. Cannae, 216 BC, the worst single day in Roman history. Hannibal, outnumbered, surrounded, and annihilated the largest army Rome had ever assembled. By some estimates, 1 in 5 Roman men of military age died in a single afternoon. Senators wept openly in the streets. Rome prepared for the end. A 19-year-old officer survived that day, the same one who, 2 years earlier, had ridden into a cavalry disaster to drag his wounded father out of it. In the days after Cannae, he heard that the group of young nobles were planning to abandon Rome and offer their services to foreign kings. Rome, they had concluded, was finished. The 19-year-old walked into their meeting with a drawn sword, held it over their heads, and made every one of them swear, never desert the Republic and kill any man who tries. Understand what happened in that room. The other survivors of Cannae drew the obvious lesson. Hannibal cannot be beaten, therefore despair. Scipio drew a different one. Hannibal cannot be beaten by us as we currently are, therefore change we must. Between those men's sentences lies the entire difference between the man history forgets and the man it cannot. The first question then, how do you defeat the undefeatable? Scipio's first answer costs the most pride. He studied his enemy, not the way you study a threat, the way you study a teacher. Every other Roman commander responded to Hannibal with denial. Fight him the old way, but harder. Call his genius trickery, his tactics beneath the dignity of Rome. They protected their pride and lost their armies. Scipio admitted fully that the man burning his country was better, and then absorbed everything that made him better. The double envelopment, terrain as a weapon, the preparation of a battle before a single soldier stepped onto it. Years later at Ilipa, Scipio destroyed a larger Carthaginian army using a refined version of Hannibal's own Cannae maneuver. The student ran the teacher's masterpiece back at the teacher's own people, improved. Sun Tzu, writing 3 centuries earlier on the other side of the earth, said that if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear 100 battles. Scipio never read it. He arrived at it independently, because structural truth does not care who discovers it. But notice the boundary. Scipio took Hannibal's methods and refused Hannibal's soul. Hannibal had been raised on an oath of eternal hatred, sworn at an altar at 9 years old. A genius fueled by hatred and, in the end, consumed by it. Scipio absorbed the weapon and left the venom where it lay. Nietzsche would warn 2000 years later that he who fights the monsters must see to it that he does not become one. Scipio is what it looks like when a man heeds that warning in advance. The second answer, when you cannot win the game, refuse the game. For 15 years, Rome kept asking the same question: how do we beat Hannibal in Italy? Every answer ended in a mass grave, because the question itself was the trap. On battlefields of his choosing, Hannibal was simply not beatable. And Rome kept asking, because the obvious question always feels like the only one. Scipio asked a different one, not how do I defeat Hannibal? What does Carthage need to keep Hannibal in the field? The answer was Spain, the silver, the recruits, the supply lines. So he tore out the roots of the Carthaginian war machine. And when Spain was finished, he invaded Africa. Carthage itself under threat. Its government did what 15 years of Roman armies could not. They recalled Hannibal from Italy. The invisible enemy left, not defeated, made irrelevant. Alexander, facing the knot no man could untie, drew his sword and cut it. Scipio did the same at the scale of a continent. And the lesson reaches beyond warfare. When a problem will not move no matter how hard you strike it, the problem may not be your effort, it may be your question. The mediocre mind doubles its force, the strategic mind changes the board. The second question the ancient world found hardest to believe: what do you do with a beaten enemy? Scipio's answer: treat mercy as a weapon. After he captured the new Carthage, his soldiers brought him, as a prize, the most beautiful of the captured women. This was normal, the accepted currency of ancient victory. Scipio learned she was betrothed to a young Celtiberian chieftain. He summoned a man, returned his bride untouched, and when her family brought gold as ransom, handed it to the couple as a wedding gift. The chieftain, Rome's enemy, returned days later with 1,400 horsemen and fought for Scipio for the rest of the war. Roman writers told this for centuries as a tale of self-restraint. That reading is too small. Scipio has grasped what almost none of his contemporaries did. There are two ways to hold conquered people, and only one survives your departure. Fear works exactly as long as you are standing there. Loyalty works while you are gone. He was not soft. The cities that resisted him learned that terribly, but cruelty, for him, was a narrow tool, never a policy. He had seen the proof in the negative. 15 years of Hannibal's victories on Italian soil, and the Latin heart of Italy never once came over to his side. Brilliance can win fields. It cannot make people want you to win. Now the honesty this channel owes you, because the philosophy has a cost. Machiavelli warned. 17 centuries later, Scipio's leniency corrupted his own ranks, and he had a case. In Spain, part of Scipio's own army mutinied. Judging this, a general more likely to forgive than to punish, Scipio put the mutiny down hard, executing its ringleaders, providing in one brutal day that the kindness had been a choice, not a weakness. Machiavelli called mercy like his a defect in a ruler, perhaps, but hold the full ledger. The commander Machiavelli held up as the model was Hannibal, and Hannibal's cruelty conquered no lasting thing, while the man of dangerous mercy ended the war and died with his victories intact. Choose your defect carefully. One thread runs beneath all of this, stranger than the rest. Scipio believed, or performed the belief, that he spoke with the gods before great decisions. He climbed to the temple of Jupiter alone before dawn and sat in silence. At New Carthage, he told his men, Neptune had visited his sleep. Then, at the exact hour the lagoon's waters dropped, sent his troops wading through water no defender thought crossable. What the man called a miracle, Scipio had learned from fishermen. The lagoon was tidal. Polybius insisted the man was no mystic, a calculator who knew the men fight differently when they believe heaven is on their side. Perhaps the silence was real in a different way, the ritual of a disciplined mind stepping out of the noise until the decision becomes visible. We cannot know, maybe both. What we know is this: every major decision of his life was made alone, in silence. By the time Scipio spoke, the argument inside him was already over. And so, Zama, 202 BC, the day before the battle, the two men met in person for the first time, alone between the camps. Hannibal, older, the legend, offered peace. Do not trust fortune.
Scipio, enough blood stains this earth. Let us make peace. Your counsel is wise, Hannibal, but Rome demands victory. Then fate seals our course. May the gods pity us.
take the certain good over the uncertain victory. Scipio answered that the time for those terms had passed. The next day, everything both men had ever learned was spent on a single field, and by nightfall, the 17-year war was over. Hannibal, who had never lost a great battle, lost the only one that mattered. To the student he had unknowingly trained at Cannae. Any other story would end here. This is where the philosophy faces its true examination. The third question is not whether a man can take power, it is what happens inside him once he has it. In Spain, the Iberian tribes had offered him a crown. He refused the word itself. Call me imperator, commander, nothing more. After Zama, he was the most beloved man in the Roman world. The people would have made him consul for life, dictator, anything he permitted them to name him. Livy records it flatly. He refused to let it even be proposed. Grasp how rare this is. Alexander reached the edge of the known world and wept, wanting more, dead at 32, with an empire that shattered before his body cooled. Caesar reached the same door, walked through it, took power for life, and was carved apart on the Senate floor by men he called friends. Scipio stood at that door, with the crowd itself pushing him through, and closed it. Why? Because he had located his worth internally, in what the Stoics after him would call the only true possessions, character and judgment. A man who needs the crown is ruled by it before he ever wears it. Scipio could refuse it because it could not complete him. There was nothing missing for it to complete. And now the last question, the cruelest one, the test of whether the philosophy was real or a performance that had never been priced. What do you do when the world you saved turns on you? Rome did not forgive Scipio for saving it. Great cities rarely forgive their saviors. A savior is a permanent reminder of the day everyone else despaired. Led by Cato, a Senate faction spent years cutting him down and finally dragged the Scipios into court on charges of corruption. On the day he was summoned, Scipio stood and instead of defending himself said, "On this very day, years ago, I defeated Hannibal and Carthage. Let us leave this quarrel, go up to the Capitol and give thanks to the gods." He turned and walked out of his own trial, and the entire assembly, even men who had come to condemn him, rose and followed him up the hill, leaving the accusers alone in an empty forum. One of the most magnificent exits in recorded history, and we owe him the honesty of naming it a defeat, wearing the costume of a triumph. The trials would never end. The greatness itself was the crime, and it could not be uncommitted. So the man who would not be king chose exile in his own country, a small farm at Liternum on the coast. He never returned to Rome. He died there, tradition says, in the same year that Hannibal, hunted to the end, took poison in his own distant exile. The two great enemies leaving the world together. Like a closing parenthesis, Scipio left one final sentence, ordered onto a tomb deliberately placed outside the city that had been his life. "Ungrateful fatherland, you will not even have my bones." 2 centuries later, the philosopher Seneca made a pilgrimage to that farm. What struck him was the bathhouse. How small, how dark, how plain. Here, Seneca wrote, the terror of Carthage washed a body tired from field work. Under a ceiling, a rich freedman of Seneca's own age would have refused to bath beneath. The man who could have owned the world, scrubbing farm dirt off himself in a dim stone room and lacking nothing. Seneca stood in that bath and understood he was standing inside the philosophy itself. So gather it into one place. Study what defeats you until it becomes your instructor, and take its lesson without taking its venom. When a fight cannot be won, remember the fight itself is the enemy's choice. And choose again. Bind people to you by what you give, not what you take, and pay the cost when that mercy is wasted, because the alternative costs more. Decide in silence before the noise can vote, and hold your worth so completely inside yourself that crowns add nothing, courts subtract nothing, and even the ingratitude of everything you saved cannot reach the place where you actually live. That is the entire philosophy of Scipio Africanus. Not a method for winning battles, a method for remaining yourself while winning them, which is the war almost every victor loses. return one last time to Ephesus, two graying soldiers, the greatest of their age, talking as the afternoon light moved across the floor. One already an exile, discarded by the city he had given everything to, the other not yet knowing the same fate was coming for him, that they would leave the world the same way, far from the countries they had made and unmade. Alexander first, said Hannibal, Pyrrhus second, myself third, and if you had beaten me, asked Scipio. Then, said Hannibal, first of all. Scipio laughed. He had spent his whole life refusing thrones, and here his greatest enemy had quietly handed him the only one he ever accepted, a place above every list that will ever be written. The two men went on talking, the war long over, the hatred long dead, nothing left between them but the one thing Scipio had understood from the beginning, and Hannibal had learned too late. The enemy was never the man across the field, the enemy was what the fight could turn you into. Scipio won both wars. History remembers very few who did.